So, I'd like to introduce one Angenescu, who is a licensed architect, owner of the Architectural Development Planning Faculty in Timisoara, Vice President of the Finnish branch of the Romanian Order of Architects since 2014, Associated Teacher and PhD student at this university since 2014, Coordinator of the 2014 and 2015 editions of Finnish Architecture Manual, and of the last 2 years editions of Finnish Architecture Bienniale. That's 4 years.
All right. Thanks very much, Levente. Thank you for having us here. Levente was an invited critic 2 years ago at Beta. And 2 years ago, we started this adventure of going on a Euro-regional scale after 9 years of events that were located strictly in Timisoara. So I will give you a bit of a background so that you understand better who we are and why we do this and how things are going back in Romania. So we represent Order of Architects, the Timiș branch, which is located around Timișoara of the Order of Architects. And I am coordinating the Beta biennial event, and I'm here together with my team, whom Levente shortly introduced before. So what is this institution, this Romanian Order of Architects? It was founded in 2009 through a legislation, and as organization we have the responsibility to organize the profession of architecture, but we also aspire to develop a responsible and cohesive professional community and to promote and consolidate good quality architecture in all its form. Which means, in a more practical term, that we have a special fund that is allocated specially for cultural projects that are doing exactly this. This type of fund is collected through every when an architect does a project, you pay some taxes to the city hall, and for every single tax, a 0.05% of it goes to this fund. So we have a yearly budget of about 500,000 euros that goes into this for funding this kind of projects. And 50% of this budget goes into this type of project that we also do, which we call annuals or biennials of architecture, which are organized by every branch of the order. We have 23 branches around the country. And 7 annuals and 4 biennials. We are one of the 4 biennials. Right. The main ingredient of this type of event, because since there is funding involved, of course, there is also some sort of a rule book that allocates this money somehow. And in this rule book, this type of event is very clearly described as an event that mainly focuses on this type of interaction, meaning this salon, as you may also know it, this type of event where you award the best project that are done in a specific year, in a specific area. And when we started doing this project, we decided that this is not enough in order for us to work towards the mission that we have as a statement in our organization's rule book. So we decided to make things at another scale, involving other types of professions and a bigger area. And it all started in this format actually in 2014, and we had 2 annual events where we tested different types of formats. But 2 years ago, we switched to a biannual type of event so that we can focus more on the quality of events and so that we can spread a bit at another scale. So this is the territory that we are working with. It's called the DKMT Euro region, which includes 2 counties from Hungary, 1 county from Serbia, and 4 counties from Romania. But of course, we couldn't do this without collaborating with the capitals of the 3 countries. And Timisoara is situated very, very neatly at about the same distance between the 3 of them. So we had a really good collaboration with the 3 capitals and also with Novi Sad, and not such a good collaboration with the smaller counties. And I think that this is also something that has very much to do with how our profession is organized throughout the territories. And this type of adventure gave us the opportunity to understand how this profession is organized in Hungary, Serbia, and Romania, and maybe what we could learn from this and how we could make this better. So one of our goals is to have a better collaboration and to empower the position of the architect, at least in this region. About this profession, we see it we see that it is very important for it to connect the public administration, our own community, and also the local community. And the space between these 3 is practically our playing ground in Beta, and we believe that this is also somehow congruent with what this profession could be. We managed to spread so much through many partnerships in all these countries, and also, of course, through funding. Only 42% of the budget for this event is obtained through the special fund that I was talking about before. Since we have as a goal to have this type of collaboration, we also apply for every single funding application possible, also at the city level, national level, county level, everything that is available, we hunt it. And almost 60% of the budget is gained through private sponsorships or public funding, which practically means that we are forcing the national, regional, and local public administration to get involved. At first, it is of course through money, but then through the program as well. The program is structured in 3 main pillars. The first one is education, then of course profession, and the third one is the city. The first one is a pillar through which we are trying to connect the profession with education, which of course is a connection that we find crucial. We started this process at a wider scale 2 years ago, where we had a series of events that were trying to get to know each school between ourselves in the Euro region. For the profession, we had also a series of events focused towards the future and also towards developing different types of services for the profession, not just looking at the quality of the built environment, but also thinking on how this profession can evolve in the future. And the city, which is actually the main pillar for us, and we will have a further detailing of this pillar, is the pillars through which we communicate with the local and wider community about the importance of architecture for the quality of everybody's life. So we managed 2 years ago to have 37 events in 57 days, and it was excruciating for us. This is why we are going to make it a bit smaller this year. We did seven online platforms, depending on the topics that we wanted to cover, with different targets and with different public. Had over 78 different professionals invited. Only a part of these were architects, because we wish for wider dialogue, and we always try to bring on different professionals. And I'm sorry that exactly Levente's name is covered, but Levente, as I told you, together with another architect, Daniel Tudor Munteanu, he's Romanian, they were the invited critics to this biennial because we think that it is important to be self-critical in this process and to have some sort of a mirror towards what we are doing so that we can always improve this process. So thank you very much for being our mirror. We had over 4,000 participants last year, so we didn't start that big. And we plan to go much bigger this year, even if it is smaller. And this is just a scroll through what we were doing. These were some events on the education pillar. And you can see some of your colleagues here at the end of the table. As I said, we invited different schools from the Euro region, first to talk about the educational systems and how they work in all these countries. Second, to talk about the pedagogical models that that influence us all. And third, to connect these two, the educational part, with the profession and to understand how we could make them better interact so that in the future we might have a better educational system, a better profession in the end. 84% of everybody who we asked about the events, and we had about 200 questionnaires spread out towards all the participants, think that this connection between education and profession is very important, and this is why we are keeping this pillar in the biennial further on. We also generate through this program a set of independent programs that run parallel with our event and independently from our event, and have such an in-between purpose between educating architects, educating the public about architecture, educating the public about cities. So this program, it's called Architectural Tours. It is made by architects but for citizens, and they are themed towards tours towards cities, towards our city, that are talking about housing in our cities, specific areas in our cities, and they are trying to explain to different people who participate how the city evolved and why specific things are important and what is the influence of the built environment. And only 2% of the participants to all the tours, we had about 250 participants were architects. Everybody else was not an architect, so it's an educational project for us. The main event in the city pillar is the Privește orașul, or City View campaign, which my colleague Simina will further present, so I won't stick to it very much. But then, as I said, we also invited other professionals to talk about the cities. We organized the Pecea Cucea, where people from the city, if you're familiar with the format, we're talking about the importance of different types of events, initiatives, and so forth for the evolution of the city. Yes, but there is a problem. Was the main exhibition 2 years ago. It was an exhibition that was talking about interventions in the public place, both top down and bottom up. It was an exhibition which was actually the fruit of a collaboration with Cake from Budapest, and it was itinerated in Budapest last year, and it's still an ongoing research for our partners in Keck. We also had a set of collateral events to it, some urban games and stuff like that. And also here, 35% of the people who participated in the exhibition and the collateral events were not architects, which is for us a great success after 9 years of only architecture-oriented events where everybody was an architect. To have a fresh public that is not an architect and that is interested about architecture and the city is very important. We also managed to do this through this type of event. This is called Upgrade My City. It is an interdisciplinary event which we organize with the Smart City Association. So it's basically us and a bunch of IT guys who talk about how we could further develop the cities, our city. Almost nobody here was an architect, and we had over 400 participants in different types of lectures and workshops that actually at the end of the event led to 4 specific projects. One was about another type of guided tours to the city, but this time not by architects, but by citizens who lived in a specific district or places. They were talking about their places. Another one was an angel investment tech startup. Another one was about schools and how schools can become places for community talks and places of empowerment for the communities. And our own project, which will continue this year in beta, was about the quality of the city and how you can actually grade that, and how this kind of grading can contribute to this product that we call housing, and on the long term influence the prices of housing. I will go into detail a bit later. All right, and of course the profession part, which is the most simple and easier to do part for us. We have a small event about light, which is contained in the biennial, but it is organized by an independent team. It's Light Edu. It's about lighting in different forms and this profession of lighting designer, which is in Romania non-existent profession, and we are pushing towards having it also. We were talking about the future of our profession with different types of practitioners, from practitioners who write, to practitioners who research, to practitioners who do buildings in a specific way. But also about the role of cultural operators and how we can further push towards the development of the profession. And of course, we also had this mandatory ingredient, the beta competition, which we also tried to bring it out to the public, and my colleague Alexandra will get into this a bit later on, so I won't stick to it. This is the team from 2 years ago. We were in total about 50 people, out of which only 9 were the core team. That was working for 6 months constantly on this, and the nutshell team, it's us 3, me, Simina, and Alexandra, who work on this throughout all the time, on designing it and funding it and everything else. Yes, as you can see, many students from our faculty are involved in what we do. So this year, we changed colors. It's blue, no longer orange. It will only last a month. We start on the 28th of September, and we finished on the 28th of October. We kept the same 3 pillars: education, profession, and city. For the education pillar, we want to continue what we started last time, and what we are doing this year is we are inviting the schools from the Euro region. That means Budapest, Győr, Debrecen, Timisoara, Bucharest, Cluj, Novi Sad, and Belgrade. These are the schools, and we are going to make a team that will work on an alternative educational system, one that is not so much stuck on each country's accreditation systems and on the problems that each of the schools is actually quite stuck on, so that we can concentrate on how the educational systems can contribute to the evolution of the profession, and more specifically in this region. So we will work on this proposal, and we will talk about it during the biennial. We are keeping the architectural tour As you can see, there are nine different tours. Each one is played 2 times. It already starts next month and it will go all the way to October with different themes. So this project also gained some ground. For the profession part, the main event is the exhibition that Ilinka started to talk about, which will be quite a large-scale event, implying different types of professionals, and where the main goal that we have is, as the goal of the biennial is, to make people talk about architecture, to make them understand what is the value in our profession, to make them need us, let's say so, and understand why they need us. So we are looking at quite a common subject. We all live somewhere. And we try to look at this subject somewhere in between from housing as a product and housing as a process, involving in this discussion people from the real estate part of housing, which is quite a big influencer on how housing is made, at least in Romania. I don't know how much specifically in Hungary, but in the whole world, this is one of the big influencers. The developers, of course, public policy about housing, and the end users, anthropologists, and so forth. So we are talking about this from many types of layers. And besides the exhibition that will present all this research and all the conclusions from the research that was looking on how this has been evolving from after the Second World War to the present. We are also having a big list of events that is looking towards the future of housing and trying to understand how we can all participate in changing what is going on. At least in Romania, the situation is quite dramatic because we have a public program that is called the First House, which means that any new family can have access to a 60,000 euros fund. So that they can buy their first house. This is one of the vectors that has led the developers on building an enormous amount of 2-rooms apartments. I mean, in every new block, 80% of the apartments are two rooms apartments. The public administration is, this is the only thing that they do, this first housing fund. And they are not putting any sorts of other pressure towards the accessibility of housing, quality of housing, and so forth. So this is going to be quite an interesting discussion in Romania in the future, where a bunch of people who started buying this type of product in the 2000s, after the crisis actually, and even before a bit, will be stuck in their apartments. And what is really interesting is that now we have initiatives for public policies from the private part. For example, the banks, because and one of our main partners is a bank which has the biggest share of the market for this type of credit, and they suddenly realize that, oh, we are owning a lot of shit. So we have to do something about this. So we started collaborating, and they want to further invest on talking and improving the quality of housing. Yeah, since they own so much housing, they started wondering, what am I owning? Can I sell this further on, or am I stuck with this type of product? Yeah. So, yeah, this is in a nutshell about the exhibition. The symposium about lighting will happen this year as well. And the beta competition, of course, and as I said, Alexandra will talk about it. I gave you a view on the future of housing talks. The symposium will be about light for cities, and it will start at the same time as the biennial, but it will only last for a few days. So the first weekend of the biennial is focused on opening everything and on light. And about the competition, I will let Alexandra inform you better. So city, this is our third and last pillar. Here we have the City View campaign and Trendsite, which both of them are programs that are including in the bid for European Capital of Culture 2021. We have won this competition in 2016. And beta and architecture is part of the bid, and we are very much involved in this. And I will leave Simina to tell you more about this in her presentation. About housing is a project that we consider more on the city pillar of the beta. Yes. And Where Do I Live is this project that is a spin-off from Upgrade My City 2016, and that is also connected to the About Housing exhibition. And this is practically a guide and a website that we are building together with the biggest real estate site in Romania, imobiliare.ro. It's called, and also this the biggest bank. It's the BCR bank. I don't know how it's the Romanian commercial bank, which has the biggest share of this type of credit in the country. So we wrote this guide, which is destined to people who want to buy a flat. And what we try to do through this guide is to look at flats as in products. I mean, if I want to buy a phone, I can always look at it and I can always find a chart where all of its components are explained. The battery lasts this long. It costs so much because the processor is like this or like that. The image quality is like this or like that. I mean, you can really describe, almost any product in this room, but it's really hard to describe a flat. So this is what we were trying to do, trying to describe it in different types of levels so that it is really accessible and simple for someone who wants to buy a flat to compare flats between themselves and to make a better and more informed choice. And one of the instruments that we have to do that is this guide, and the other one is the site, which is will be launched during the biennial, which practically automates the majority of the process of the assessment processes for this type of product. So this is a sum up of the 5 weeks of biennials of beta. We will start with the opening on the 28th, and we will also launch the Trendsite project and the exhibition, which will be open throughout the biennial. Then we will launch this guide on the 1st of October, which is the International Housing Day. We will have the Light Edu event and also the first batch of tours. On the third week, we have the collateral events for the About Housing, the ones that are oriented towards the future of housing, and another batch of tours. It's also the week where we start the exhibition for the beta competition, which is a public exhibition as well. And on the fourth week, we talk about education, and we go back to the public space with Trendsite. And of course, we end it with the beta competition presentations, which is practically a group of presentations from everybody who has been nominated for the beta awards, and we have the closing party. In all this time, the City View campaign will also be going on. So this is what we have been doing, and this is what we will do. And because the public space program and the beta competition program, we believe that they are more interesting to show in much more detail, I will let my colleagues tell you more about them. So thanks.
and let me introduce Simneku, who is a recent architect since 2015, currently practicing at Andreescu and Braibolonsky Architecture Office, Timisoara. Starting with her students, she developed an interest for organizing different sorts of events that put into discussion the architectural profession and the means to practice it. She has always been interested in theorizing and debating through different instruments, the framework, and even definition of the architect. She finds that in today's society, an experimental, reflexive approach to this matter is essential. Simna is also involved in Timisoara's annuals and bienniale since 2014.
Next to symbol on the left.
All right. Thank you, Levente, for the introduction. We would like to generally thank Levente and his colleagues for the invitation launched towards Timisoara to present what's up there. While Juana has made an overview on what happens at Beta, I would like to focus a bit more on what happens through Beta with respect to public space. So the means by which we decided that this intertwining of public space and architectural events should happen, could happen, and maybe even for the future will happen. So the focus is obviously a campaign for public space, but as you will see further on, this goes through several threads. And as I would like to call it, this is basically a story about people, spaces, and places. So moving on to a timeline, like Juana said, we started back in 2014, and back then we were a group of 8 architects who were very young and very idealistic, and we were so set to change everything and make the best architectural event Timisoara has ever seen. That passed. And now we're at the second edition of Beta, but back in 2014 we had a hunch, even though it was not very well developed and not very well established or even worded in our minds, that there needs to be a connection between public spaces and the architectural culture in Timisoara, and for that matter, absolutely everywhere in this whole world, especially since the urban culture is growing bigger and bigger, and as we know, more than 50% today of the world's population lives in cities, and we can only expect that this percentage will grow over time. So we started in 2014 with an annual event. It was an architectural annual back then. In 2015 as well, it was an architectural annual, but by then we knew that we were going to switch to the biennial format. So it was a bit more condensed and a bit more focused on some important aspects that we decided should be present during this interchange period. And then we have the 2016 edition of Beta, the first one, and the 2018, which hopefully will see you in Timisoara. And with this chance, I'm launching the official invitation to all of you to visit Timisoara if you have not done so by now. And I will tell you a bit more at the end of the presentation about the future prospects of our project related to public spaces. So, in 2014, what happened actually was very first testing of possibilities of what could happen, of what happens actually in Timisoara, or what happened in that year, because we saw, so we got our hands on this event, on organizing this event, and we saw that there were quite a few NGOs or local actors that were implementing. They were doing projects which were related to public space. And we thought that it's such a good idea to bring all these people to a common table, since we have this common denominator called public space, and let's see what we can do together. So at the end of the day, basically, we came out with 3 projects. One was our own, let's say, and 2 of them were collateral projects which we supported, but they were organized by our partners. And the very first one was an event called, it's actually a festival called Waiting Spaces. It's organized by an NGO called Simultan. It's based in Timisoara, this association, and its focus, its objective is actually to support all types of events having to do with new arts, new medias, this intertwining of technology, culture, and art. So they're a group of very fast-forward-looking artists, basically, based in Timisoara, of course, which year by year want to and actually do implement this and organize this festival, which has a very large reach and a very nice range of international artists, actually. And I highly recommend it if you ever get the chance to see it. In 2014, Waiting Spaces was themed building site, and a bit of context here is that back in 2014, Timisoara was in a reshaped state, meaning that its central public spaces, three main squares, as you maybe have seen in Ilinka's plan of the city, general plan of the city, were under construction in the sense that while before cars could travel throughout the city center, the local municipality decided, okay, stop, we're in the 21st century, we need to make these areas available for pedestrians. So out with the cars, in with the pedestrians. So this was a very nice connection these artists decided to make with their festival, theming it building site. And what they focused on was finding a selection of artists which made some interventions in public spaces in Timisoara. Of course, those under construction were not available, but they were present, and they were really insisting, these organizers of Waiting Spaces, they were insisting on these particular sites as sites which did not need any other artistic intervention, because they were there, and they were interventions already present on site. So they were focusing actually on researching this relationship between the citizens of the city and their public spaces, and how much this relationship can change, for example, during 2014 by means of a building site, because we all know that's quite a disturbance, especially if it's at such large scale when you talk about the city's central and major public spaces. So this was the third edition of Waiting Spaces. They kept going on, even though our paths were somehow separated throughout these years. They are still active, doing quite well, and as I said, I strongly recommend this festival. The second project we had, the second collateral event that happened during the annual, was organized by the Association of Landscape Architects. It's the west branch, the west of the city, of the country, meaning. And as architects, but a bit more on a favorable scale, landscape architects in Romania are not very visible, unfortunately, as a profession, and they are trying as well by all means possible to make their profession more visible and to get the reach they need in order to profess as they would like to, and I think this is generally available for architects as well. So what they wanted to do, and this is also an event which had the previous edition, this would be the second, they organized, it's called, I'm not sure if it's visible there, public space ecological infrastructure, they called it. And it was a series of events which consisted firstly of lectures, of course, because they had invited participants, but also lectures, workshops connected to these lectures, an exhibition, and very importantly for us, this public debate, which took place in an installation they built, actually, with help from our volunteers, in one of the major pedestrian arteries of the city. So it's not like this was the first event that saw a public debate going out into the public space, but for sure it was a very present one, especially since this location, which is the central synagogue of the city, which is located in the center of the city, was very present, and it was facing a very busy pedestrian artery, which was actually built or completed, let's say, only several months ago. Now, The outcome of this event, actually, for us especially, was that it set the milestone, and it actually set the starting point for what we can do. Because we realized that if this is possible, and this is actually an event organized by our colleagues, landscape architects, why not? Then the sky is the limit, so somehow. So I'm going to switch next to our event connected to the public space, and this is the Radical Island Blaster. It's called so because it's somewhat of a franchise. The tutors of this workshop, because it was actually a workshop, were and still are actually Parasite 2.0. They're a group of 3 young architects from Genoa. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're very interesting in the sense that their methodology is highly connected to what public space means today, and especially their connections with what the Occupy movement had, with what democracy means these days related to architecture and public space. So these are all very hot topics which they continuously, even in the present day, constantly research and try to delve into them as deep as possible. So what we did here is actually pick one particular square in Timisoara, which we all agreed is not used to its full potential, as many public spaces are. I mean, 95% if I dare advance a percentage. And try to make there what they called, and this is their whole conceptual framing of the workshop, what they call an island, a radical island. And they wanted to do this, and they actually succeeded doing this by means of this object you see in this picture below, which is actually a very low-cost device. They call it a nomadic device, very related to the concept of islands, by which they wanted to set up in this public square we were talking about, we selected together, to set up a space concentrated in this device where people could actually very freely and without any impediment and without any authority stepping over their shoulders and so on, just say what they feel about the spaces, the public space at hand, what they feel the current use is, what they feel the future use of this public space should be, and so on. So at the end of the project, there were 3 major objectives on this. One of them was to actually develop a map of all these possible radical islands throughout the city, all these scattered public spaces which do not have the proper or the desired uses that the citizens wish they would have. So this map showcasing a series of public spaces and also a chart, like the Athens Charter, which would be actually some sort of official document, as official as the result of a workshop with architects can be, saying or stipulating what types of uses would be useful, and trying to have a general overlook on the city with respect to public spaces. And as well, all this material should and has been gathered into a fanzine, which would turn out to be eventually a legacy which we followed on, and you will see this in the further projects. So this was a very interesting milestone, like I said, and it was the best starting point, I think, for what eventually followed. And thinking actually these days about these projects, I very surprisingly realized that these threads are actually very present and very visible somehow, and are continuing throughout all these projects. So in 2015, like I said, it was somehow a hybrid edition of the annual, the architectural annual, because by then we knew that we were going to switch to biennial format. But this is the moment after the experience of 2014 when we realized that we need to be a lot more focused, and we need to set some points of strategy and actually devise a whole strategy with respect to public spaces. And of course, take into account all the activities that were being implemented by our partners, but to generate a single, very focused project which would make clear for everyone that this is our scope, this is what we want to do. And what we wanted to do was actually generate a platform for dialogue, much less for intervention, which is very common for architects. Of course, we all want to build. That's why we're architects. But the objective here was slightly different in the sense that when talking about the city, we considered that built space actually is not that important. And I'm now coming back to what I started with, meaning the triad of people, spaces, and places. And we realized that the built environment has very little to do actually, because it's a consequence of the interplay of the other two, so people and places. Now places are obviously a resultant somehow of the spaces, but it's a vicious circle somehow, and I will come back to this idea later. So back in 2015, we decided that we need to have nothing more, nothing less than a campaign focused on public spaces. And while scratching our heads what to do, we decided that the best start for such a campaign would be to actually switch the focus of people, or actually better put, to bring into the attention of citizens that there are public spaces other than the central trademarked public spaces, central squares of the city, which any tourist has on their map and so on. So we wanted to see if it's possible to somehow reconnect actually citizens with their everyday scenery, all the framework, this built environment which somehow acts as a background but completely invisible. We wanted to bring it into the spotlight somehow and see how people would reconnect with it. And we tried to do this by means of a very simple instrument, which is this. It's not the girl, it's the postcard. And the idea was that we would print some copies, a lot of copies actually, of this postcard, and we would simply ask people to take one and take a snapshot of the city or any other special place they feel they need to take into their attention and to our attention, obviously. And unfortunately, there was a bit of a glitch back there, because in trying to make people and citizens be more active, be more proactive, and engage them in this project, we framed the whole campaign as a competition. And looking back now to this decision, I would say that it was not the best decision. I mean, especially when trying to engage citizens, if you try to swap the carrot in making the move, that's not going to work on a long-term strategy or in the long run. So we had about 160 photos taken and submitted to the competition, and this is a very, very small number, unfortunately. But like I said, it was the first edition, and we sort of assumed that this would be a first step with not that much impact, but it will grow in time, and this is what we're doing now. And all these 160 submissions were basically divided into 3 categories, which somewhat similar to what Juana presented before, structured the whole annual, which was art in public space, infrastructure, and investments. So when a citizen would decide, this looks like an interesting spot in the city, I take a snapshot, they would simply submit it under one of these 3 categories and hope to win a prize. Now, what happened is that we, while looking on the results of the campaign, many of these pictures, this is not visible in this very nice assembly of many postcards. Many of these pictures, of these snapshots, were focused on negative aspects of the city. Big surprise. Not one of them, or very few of them, had a truly positive take on the city, let's say, or a picture of a space that was genuinely working. Rather than that, people decided that they would emphasize the negative aspects of the city. And we said, okay, we're fine with that, but we need to see how to further engage people, in the sense that we're not happy just having a statistic on all the bad places in the city, all the places that citizens think suck and they're not worthy of use, of general use, actually. And the result was that in 2016, with the coming of the first edition of Beta, the campaign stayed, had the same name, and one I didn't mention here, but there's a very nice word play here with this title. Privește orașul in Romanian means city view, but it's a very literal translation in English. While in Romanian, it also has this possibility of being understood as the city is your business, the city is your concern. You need to do something about it, not just stay put and not react. So in 2016, after the 2014 and 2015 experience, we decided that the City View Privește Orașul campaign should vie in somewhat of a different direction, meaning that the visual part, the visual component was still very important. But the twist was that the focus was now on the more personal and more social aspect of a public space, meaning that the premise here was that we all have different memories, different projections, different hopes or different relationships toward the public spaces of the city. And many of those are collective because this is how the central public spaces were born, because many people had connections with these respective places. And we tried through this campaign to actually bring them forth and to make people share them, with the result at the end of the day that we illustrated them and placed them throughout the city so that the result of the campaign would actually be more visible. This also with respect to what happened in 2015, when the competition indeed ended with an exhibition of all the snapshots, but it wasn't quite as public as we wished it to be, especially in relationship to the public spaces we were talking about. So, the same postcard was available here. But this time they were slightly different because the postcard's purpose was actually to gather all the stories people had to share. And we had over 300 stories submitted. But to give an extra push somehow, because people in Romania are not very communicative. They're very passive. They like to ask questions, but only in a personal level. So if it comes to public spaces and public speaking, people are not that willing to share their experiences. So the purposes of these postcards were to collect these stories because they were quite anonymous, let's say. This is also the website, and I'm coming back to it here, because maybe you want to check it out. It's very interesting. You have both the 2015 and 2016 editions. So this is a snapshot actually of one of the first moments after we opened the campaign, let's say in 2016. And I like this picture especially because it shows how these, by the way, the postcards were not that big. These are just some mock-ups that we started with, and the stories on them are actually the fruit of a collaboration we had with some local historians, writers, and the local university, where we realized that there is a very large archive of stories, of such stories, even though they're more complex and a bit longer than a haiku. Which were actually very serious and very helpful material for study in this idea the campaign had in 2016. So we decided to actually hook this on in a public space. This is actually the site of a festival, Plai, if you know, in Timisoara. It happens every autumn. And this was actually a means of hooking people and getting them interested to participate. This was also followed by a workshop in drawing where we actually had a very nice interaction with children. And this was doubled both by storytelling. So people would come and say their stories about places in the city, and there were other people who could actually see their stories and just draw them. Because there are two other components of this campaign which I would like to mention. One of them is that the point was that at the end of the submission period, 10 of the best 10 stories would be illustrated by 10 locals. So 10 local stories would be illustrated by 10 local graphicians and illustrators. Again, this is the visual hook I was talking about, and apparently this works quite well. We're visual beings, actually. So this would be the first component, like I said, the illustrators and how they interacted with the stories and how they decided to filter them down and actually generate these very beautiful, actually, representations of these stories. The other component would be, again, placed at the beginning of the campaign, and it's actually the part where we decided that we need some help from what we called ambassadors. And these are some personalities, some local personalities that we decided are quite trendsetters, actually, and they could help us in engaging different slices of the public that are not actually very reachable for us as architects, because we tend to have this halo of the ivory steeple stuck somewhere in the building realm. So we had some video shootings with them, and we asked them basically to do the same thing as any other participant at the campaign would do, meaning tell a little story about any other or any public space in Timisoara and why they feel it's important to connect with it this way. This is a picture, again, I think very, very expressive about the result of the campaign. So each of these 10 illustrations were shown in these bus stops, basically, city lights we call them back in Timisoara. And well, I think this photo is very representative. It's enough to look at the surrounding spaces. It's actually the generic public space in Timisoara. And then you have this contrast, in contrast with this public space and the dereliction of it, or the misuse, or the isolation, or the whatever you want to call it. In contrast with this, you have this illustration showing that some people or a person actually had a very different view on a possibly similar public space, maybe in previous times, whatever, but still there's this disconnection, I feel, at least looking at this picture, between what the possibilities or the potential of a public space can be and the actual state of it, which is very objective because we see it with our two eyes. Now, going over the same feedback process as we did back in 2015 after the campaign, looking at the 2016 edition, the conclusion was somehow that while trying to get people to talk about the city and share some stories about it was quite fruitful. Like I said, over 300 stories were submitted. The general line of these stories was, I would call it backward looking, because not one of them was a perspective view into the possibilities or the possible future of a public space. Not one of them. It's quite explainable, actually, because you can very easily or more easily relate to something that has happened and to actually build a connection with that public space, in the sense that, I don't know, my first kiss was in that park, or whatever you may think of. It's a lot more difficult to make a connection with a space by means of something that does not exist other than in your head. So this was a very shocking conclusion for me, because one of the stakes of the campaign is obviously to get people more engaged, but not in the nostalgic sense, but in the more proactive sense that we need to get more, I don't know, get ourselves out of the chair, go out in the public space and do something about it, not just sit, reminisce on how nice that park was 20, 30 years ago, but to take some action. So, by means of consequence, this edition of the campaign, the City View campaign, will focus slightly different on precisely this connection between people and spaces. Like I said, while the previous editions of the campaign were very visual in focus, this time we decided that we need to get more complex and look at what actually connects the people to a space. And I'm coming back now to the triad I mentioned at the beginning. So it's people, spaces, and places. And we could see that the connection that's missing throughout these campaigns was actually the places. There were no places there. There were only spaces and people who occasionally, by whatever stimulation we got to offer them, decided that, oh, it's worth taking a snapshot or it's worth sharing a little story. And when I talk about places, I actually mean this very complex intertwining, or this very complex web of memories, of sensations, of perceptions, of prospects, so going through this scale of past, present, and future this is actually what comes to bind us with our built environment, and this is what actually transforms it from a public space into a public place. So, while this connection was very important, it was quite difficult actually to come up with an instrument or a strategy for this campaign that would frame it more than just visually, like I said, those other editions of the campaign were. And now I'm going to make a very, very short leap back into space, and I'm going to refer to what Oana mentioned in her presentation, which is the award Timisoara got back in 2016, the award of the title of European Capital of Culture in 2021. Now, the association that wrote the bid book, to its respect, considered that architecture is very important for the bid book. And they decided that, actually the greater context was that they decided this bid book should be written by a host or a constellation of local NGOs and cultural operators. So it was a bottom-up rather than a top-down intervention or approach to writing this bid book. And this is honestly one of the facts that led to the winning of this title. So we were invited basically to write a project for this bid book. And again, we tried to reminisce and try to simply overlook or make a list of all the things that went right and went wrong for all these editions of the City View campaign. And coming back to what I said earlier, we realized that the connection that was missing was exactly this place quality of the public space. And while thinking how to develop and insist and emphasize this aspect, we realized that people don't really care about public spaces or don't react or are not proactive with respect to them because they are such abstract terms. Because what's a public space? If you do not put a name tag on it, or if you do not put a smell on it or a sound to it, it's very, very hard to connect with it. So we said that maybe it's a good idea to switch from this abstract perspective of things and simply try to generate a list of possible spaces, public spaces this time, and see if we can somehow morph them, transform them into personas, so anthropomorphizing them somehow, and giving them exactly these attitudes, characteristics, looks even, which people have, and which actually facilitate the connection that people have with them. So the simple idea was that if we make places or personas out of public spaces, people might actually be more interested in them and be more proactive with respect to taking care of them or simply using them more oftenly than they do. This is a description of the bid book and the project we've submitted for them. This was actually thought of for a longer period, so up until 2021 when the actual year of the title is happening. And we thought of it as a longer period development where we would have a selection of 3 to 5 locations in the city. After that, we would have workshops and integrate the feedbacks of local target groups, historians, sociologists, and all sorts of key figures that would help us in define the characteristics of the place. The second step would be to actually transfer these characteristics into an illustration and into a persona, a character, like I said. And the third and last step in this framework would have been to actually have some interventions in the place which would make people aware that something's happening there, And actually the, the stake was bigger in the sense that on a long run and after 2021, people would remember the characters and the personas in actually embodying those public spaces. So in this sense, this is what will happen in 2018 with the City View campaign. This year we are deciding to select somewhere in the realm of 8 locations in the city and try to build up some characters for them with, again, a host of local illustrators. And this again is a first step for the project because we aim to implement a succeeding phase next year and each and every year up until 2021. So by 2021, we would actually have a development of these characters, and this is why it's very important that we start small with the locations and an illustration after a short workshop with some people in Timisoara, which could offer some feedback on what characteristics those spaces would have. And making them grow, like I said, up until 2021, and by that year we would hope that we would have a very nice transformation somehow, or very similar to a family album, or I would dare say even a reality show, watching these personas grow over time. So if they start like children, because that's the key operator somehow in the strategy, they would become by 2021, we hope, adults. And in this process, make actually the citizens more related to these public spaces. I would revert now to a picture, this one, which is actually the concept, basically, of the Breathing Spaces program. Because if you substitute this very sweet little girl, which was the subject of the photograph, with one of these public spaces, it's basically, in a nutshell, what we want to do with this Breathing Spaces project. So in short, in the biennial, in the 2018, this year's edition, we would have a selection of 8 places, and the starting point for this process, this growing process, which will go on up until 2021. Now the next project I would talk about, I'm not boring you too much, it's called Transite, and this is also realized in partnership with the 2021 association, which implements the bid book. And it's a collateral one in the sense that while City View, the Privește Orașul campaign, is a major part of the bid book, this one we generated together at their invitation again. And the stake here was to actually think of a project which would do a bit more than, it's a very short project because it needs to be implemented this year, but which would stimulate again and focus the attention of the public on public spaces. And this was our call because the alternative was the same very old lectures in a whatever hall you can imagine. So we wanted to go out in the street more, and precisely because of the city category that Oana so clearly explained in her presentation, the stake was to find, again, a location in the city that has quite a potential from this perspective, and especially because it's we're talking about the 2021 association, the cultural potential was very important. And we decided that this location would be the central station, the central train station in Timisoara, Gara de Nord, and make it visible. And what we considered was very important here was to not only bring it into focus, but also to change the perception people have on it. The central train station in Timisoara is not a very happy place, unfortunately. That's exactly the reason why we chose it as a place for this project. It's a transite space, and unfortunately, while it has a lot of potential, because as you can see here, of course, all the functional spaces are there in place and are functioning properly, so to speak, by the standards the railroad companies have. But here, where I'm showing you this area is an enormous hall which is completely unused. It's derelict. It was the site of the headquarters of a former bank. Very odd pairing up. But now it's completely unused. And while being there on a site visit, we saw the space and we realized that this hall alone could be of sufficient reason to bring into focus the space of the central train station. And how we decided to do this was actually a two-component project. On one hand, because we're architects, we said that it would be very nice if we could somehow provide people and the trafficking persons going in and out, and basically each and every day, because it's a used space, if you can imagine that. The central train station is a place where up to 1,000 people can walk very easily each day. So it would be very interesting, we thought, if we as architects could provide the support for these people to see the space in a different way. And we said that the best way to do this was by means of an architectural competition, which focuses on an installation. So it's a temporary investment here because they're going on for 20 years now, I think, through constant rehabilitations, and you can't touch the floors, and they have a new mural over there. So it's a temporary installation, but besides the functional aspects that need to be accomplished, seating spaces, anything you can think of, it was very important for us that this installation would bring into attention simply the qualities of the space. Again, in the reach or in this effort of making it transform into a place. So it was the idea is to have an architectural competition. This will be very importantly opened again to the Euro region. So not only the counties Oana mentioned, but also throughout for all students and architects in Romania, Serbia, and Hungary. And hopefully we will be launching this sometime in autumn. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you more details because, as it happens with any capital of culture, there are public funding involved. You do not want to be in their places, as a fact. And there are some issues, but hopefully this will be solved and we will get to see this architectural installation built, because I forgot to mention, the winner of the competition will actually have the budget to build his or her project in the space. So it would, our idea is to build it and to leave it there, to see how people interact with it, to actually see live. It's a live project, basically. See how maybe, even though 1 month is, or the period would be very short, some things could change, the hope is. So on one hand you have the architectural competition with the installation, and on the other you have light installation, because as I've been showing here, the big book, or the concept for the big book with which Timisoara won the title, is Shine Your Light, Light Up Your City. So the concept of light is very important throughout, and this is a very interesting document. If you have some spare time, you could skim over it. So in this context, we decided that it's a very good idea to actually have light installation in the space, especially because when nighttime comes and the travelers are fewer and fewer, the space is actually lit very parsimoniously, I wouldn't say badly, but it functions, but you do not get the sense that it's a place you would want to be at 2 a.m. It's a central train station. So the light installation, again, would be placed again in the space of the central train station. We would have an international light artist commissioned to do it, site visits, so on. And again, the idea is to inaugurate and cut the ribbon for the light installation in correlated with the biennial's schedule. sometime in the autumn. Again, I cannot advance some very clear dates, unfortunately, but if you simply type our address, betacity.eu, you will definitely find news, and you can find all the details as they come up and as we can offer them, of course. Yes, this is an image, and I'm very proud actually of this try of identity. It's a very starting point, but I think it perfectly explains how we want to actually open the horizons of a derelict place like the train station, and what it can actually become. So from very small, growing and opening up to the public side, basically, and public use. That would be it. Thank you. And if there are any questions.
So, thank you very much. And finally, I would like to introduce Alexandra Maria Rigler, who is an architect, and cultural manager involved in various NGOs who are dealing, among others, with community, empowerment over public space, participatory processes, and architectural education. Since 2016, she is contributing to Timisoara architecture bienniale data in supporting and promoting architecture in its various forms and manifestations. And since 2017, she is a member of the expert committee of the European Prize for Urban Public Space.
Hello, and thank you for having us here. It's nice to see familiar faces. I will continue and end with an invitation to you to participate in the Beta 2018 competition, the mandatory one that Juana said, which supports and promotes architecture in its various forms and manifestations. It is one of the key elements of the complex map that we plan for this year biennial. As Juana mentioned before, this year biennial 2018, it's at its second edition after Beta 2016 and after 9 annual events. This type of competition was common to all events, either biennial or annual, organized by the Romanian Order of Architects Timiș Territorial Branch. And it is really important to see where we want to take it, because before 2016 the competition was open only in the Timiș County in Romania, and with the addition of 2016 we decided to open the pool of participation and to target the 3 neighboring countries, Romania, Serbia and Hungary, with a specific focus on the DKMT Euro region. You have seen previously this map. So the Euro region contains 2 counties from Hungary, Bács-Kiskun and Csongrád, and the Vojvodina region of Belgrade, of Serbia, and 4 counties from Romania. And by open to the 3 countries and a specific focus on the Euro region, we would like to highlight the architectural build in the past 2 years in the Euro region, because we are very sure that the architecture built in this region is sharing a similar context. And also we would like to open a dialogue with the 3 countries in order to talk about the future of architecture, and this we will do with 3 competition categories. And mentioning those, these are the 6 competition categories that we have in mind for this year. We reached them after, in 2016, we had 16 of them, and many of them were not that well represented. So We kept all of them, but we included them in only 6 categories, and in this way the jury will have the role of a curator and will compose and recompose the works that will be submitted. Okay, we will have 2 juries. One will be for the architecture essay category, and we would like to offer 6 awards and 12 mentions. We started to work on it, so this is the official calendar. We will launch it in 4th of June, and since we are here in Budapest, you can submit works at least to 3 categories, the last 3 ones: architecture, essays, visions, experiments, initiatives for architecture, and also graduation projects. Okay. I wanted to give you a view on how Beta 2018 competition was in numbers. So we only had 13 submitted works from Hungary. It's not that much. Okay. Since we want this competition and its related exhibition to be a relational interface both between the profession and the social cultural context in which it operates, we have in mind to have it in different spaces and places from the city. So this is from the inauguration. We had it in the shop windows from the historic center, and it was really nice to go and talk with all the shop owners to convince them to have our panels in their windows. And the other image from the right is from the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning from Timisoara. We also traveled this exhibition to Bina, which is Belgrade International Architecture Week last year, and to other places and events, professional events in our country. And this one is from Bata, the architecture bienniale from Cluj. So the first one is our competition website, because we use this platform as a tool for communication. If you got there, you will see that we have everything necessary for you to submit questions and so on and so forth. The last edition we had it in Hungarian also, so it was Romanian, Hungarian and Serbian, but we are not going to keep this because it was really difficult for us to handle the translations, the exact translations of every word. So this year we will only have it in Romanian and English, and we will try to keep it like that. And if there are any questions, you can contact us on the address below. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for having us here.
Okay, thank you very much for the lectures and for the audience as well, and I hope we will meet you to be sure. Thanks again.